Welcome to September the 9th. I'll start from 2017, work back to 2013, take it from there. Some things should not happen, but they do. Comey seems to have immunized Hillary Clinton against prosecution while simultaneously getting the FBI to create a false document accusing Trump of colluding with Russia. If true, and Mueller should be aware, Mueller should be charged with treason along with Comey. Trump needs to keep draining the swamp. Richmond Tigers have a week off after dispatching Geelong Cats. A red-hot Sydney Swans take on Cats next week in a must-win situation. AFL is an exciting sport and unpredictable, mixed with possibilities. From 2016. If robbers ever broke into my house and searched for money, I'd just laugh and search with them. CW, a former student with political ambition for the Australian Labor Party. You could get into trouble for paying your robbers less than minimum wage. Fair work works for you. Turnbull has assured us that he has not panicked at all. He planned to make a mistake and did so in a thoroughly bureaucratic way. Had Turnbull taken longer to make his mistake, he might have been risked being called out as hesitating. But Turnbull is a leader of a conservative party and wants to be remembered for that. To be honest, his work is done. Imagine if Turnbull had not given $300 million, but instead $150 million, but the same results having occurred had happened. That makes the aid dollar more efficient, and from that more efficient $150 million, that savings you could give me $50 million, and Australia would be $100 million better off. Think about that. Give David $50 million and Australia gets $100 million. Then ask yourself, why not give David $300 billion and clear Australia's debt? I really want to help Australia clear her debt. Think about that, but not too long, or Turnbull will have lost everything. The law is in black and white, but who can read it? Judges have judgment, and so they don't need to actually see the words. They can infer the words into existence and risk being made national treasures. Meanwhile, smart kids that might think they know everything say what they know they can get away with. Teen snark is funny, but this precious library assistant has had the last laugh. They have victimized themselves for years in anticipation of what they haven't ever earned, having been enabled by an industry that never gave a damn so long as there was a slush fund in it for masters. That is why some kids have had their lives ruined, not because the entire system is rotten, but because a petty bureaucrat exploited the ruined system with the blessing of incompetence like Gillard, Rudd, Shorten, and Turnbull. Meanwhile, deluded conservatives, like myself, call out Abbott Akbar every time Turnbull speaks or makes a mistake. Abbott is so good he makes Turnbull make mistakes of silence, too. Abbott forces Turnbull to make mistakes even when Turnbull hesitates. Pine is in charge of a $50 billion turkey, which probably won't see Thanksgiving. Is that defamatory? I was visiting Melbourne at the time of the final betrayal last year. I arrived on Thursday night and left on Tuesday morning. I had lined up several people I desperately needed to speak with to avoid having to move interstate to find work again. It had been 16 years since my last Melbourne visit. I failed. Each person cancelled with me after I got here, but prevaricated about seeing me. My social visits went well. Little else did, except for one senior person who met with me at 9 a.m. on the Monday morning after a Friday cancellation. He asked me my opinion of Abbott and Turnbull and freedom of speech. He expressed disappointment with Abbott. I said I felt it would be easier when the Libs finally dealt with Turnbull. I thought Abbott was safe and had turned a corner, that Turnbull's undermining would have to stop. He gave me a lot of time, considering his opinion, but had to go, saying something was happening. A journalist who had promised to hear me out did much the same without hearing me out, and in the year since has not heard me out, because that was when Turnbull overthrew Abbott with Costello's help. Ask Jeff Kennett, who he preferred as PM. Thing is, journalists wanted Abbott overthrown, and ever since they have desperately looked to validate that choice, but they won't find it so long as the reason for Costello's choice is not obvious. Costello believes in a modern party with leaders who don't get their position through political backstabbing, but through training and merit. There is a succession, and Turnbull has not been dithering, but fighting that succession plan. Turnbull has been getting the same people who said Abbott looked bad to say that Morrison now looks bad, and this seems to worry Julie Bishop, who is now trying to look bad too. And not a single one of those self-absorbed bastards knows or cares what they have cost me, the Liberals, the Nationals, or the nation. Costello had negotiated with Howard a transition to clear the way to transition for Downer to Howard in the early 90s. Howard was of the belief Costello had the skill and would be a good leader, but needed to knock off a sitting one in order to prove his mettle, as the cult of leadership works that way for conservatives. Costello believed in modern board-style leadership that worked well in industry. However, Howard brought Turnbull into government, then cabinet, as an obstacle for Costello. Costello tanked. Turnbull began undermining the Howard government and succeeded in clearing the leadership with the 2007 government change. Only Costello was compromised in similar ways to Boris Johnson post-Brexit, and so Costello left before accepting the poisoned chalice of leadership, with Turnbull poisoning the well. Nelson took the job for a year before succumbing to Turnbull. From then on, it was clear air for Turnbull, and he would have had a great front bench to take him into government, except he has no skill or ability as a leader. Hockey challenged Turnbull over AGW, but chose at the last minute to embrace AGW too. In the leadership vacuum before the vote, without having backstabbed anyone, Abbott stood and secured the leadership. At that time, Costello was distant from the party and very bitter about Howard, but it had been Turnbull's destabilization that had ultimately cost the Libs government 2 years earlier. Abbott used Turnbull's assets much better than Turnbull had. Credlin was very good once she wasn't hamstrung by Turnbull's indecisive hubris. Julie Bishop could be a head kicker as to IC, but had not enough experience or ability to be first. Costello's office had remained behind and still had connections. One was Nicky Sava. Abbott's leadership took the party to government with a good majority, but he had been hamstrung the entire time by Turnbull, whose leaks hurt successive state regimes too. Costello was called in to broker a way forward to prevent the hemorrhaging. Senior party members would have done it without the permission of Credlin's husband. To get rid of Turnbull, the Liberals couldn't just boot him because of their constitution unless they promoted him, and then he could fall on his face. The method had to be to elevate him and then get a succession. Turnbull had not the talent to force it, but Costello targeted things that played to Turnbull's strengths. The Republic captain's picks criticism and the office structure Peter Credlin. By attacking Abbott's office and not Abbott, journalists were able to attack as they liked, so that Abbott's successes were sidelined and so-called mistakes were emphasized. Sava was used to guide the narrative, so that as Turnbull stumbled a few times before the coup, it still gathered momentum. Even so, Abbott had run effective government and had begun to make his government and his position very secure. Abbott had shredded Palmer and the independents, who were beginning to look foolish for hurting Australia and a little insecure about whether Turnbull could reward them for their opposition to good government. When Hastie looked like performing well in by-election, then Turnbull was forced to one last throw of the dice. Turnbull made promises to many about his behavior he has since broken. Turnbull's promise of free speech over 18C to backbenchers, with better relationship with independents and more effective communication between colleagues than Abbott could deliver, was not Turnbull's pitch. It was a tacit admission that Turnbull had previously gummed the works. Bishop had worked in tandem too with Turnbull, leaking about foreign affairs issues involving Abbott that were not true, and encouraging backbenchers in WA and Wyatt Roy in Queensland to promote Turnbull over Abbott. Costello's plan for succession for Turnbull is structural. Once Turnbull was leader, he would move to secure his leadership, but he would need to retain his compromise to IC, and he would need to reward Morrison. The party will be brought into balance once Turnbull falls on his face and is rolled. It will happen. Bishop will want it, but she has not got the ability to get it or keep it. Morrison has the ability, but has been hurt by Turnbull's smears, as Turnbull blames him for Turnbull's mistakes. Abbott could still do it if he wants to when the time comes. Costello didn't need to anoint anyone. Turnbull can't use his wealth to hurt the party again. Instead, the worst he can do is be like Malcolm Fraser, John Hewson, or Peter Collins. Abbott looked pretty good at the beginning too, to be honest, but few commentators were admitting it. Prior to the final betrayal last year, Abbott put up what his government had achieved in 2 years, and it was impressive. What he had failed to do was not his fault, but he was working to address it. Turnbull had made it harder, and so Abbott had had to shelve the culture war of freedom of speech for the economic one of budget repair. But Turnbull exploited the fact that Turnbull was undermining Abbott, and so the willing idiots said it was Abbott's fault that neither freedom of speech was pursued nor budget repair. Abbott had a long list of achievements. Turnbull has none beyond Miranda Devine's stated belief he's a wily fox. I'm not a total prude, but a 9-year-old showed this to me through a YouTube video which was totally age inappropriate, only it could be a smash hit for those exact years. Yandere Simulator is a stealth game about stalking a boy and secretly eliminating any girl who seems interested in him while maintaining the image of an innocent schoolgirl. The gameplay is similar to the Hitman series. You are put into a large environment filled with many NPCs, and you must track down a specific target and eliminate them. You can use stealth to kill your target without any witnesses, stage an accident that leaves no evidence, or just slaughter anyone who gets in your way. If you don't dispose of corpses, clean up blood, and destroy evidence, then the police might be able to link you to a murder and arrest you. If you don't want to get any blood on your hands, you can use social sabotage to get rid of a girl, frame her for one of your crimes, get her expelled from school, or ruin her reputation. If you truly want her to suffer, convince every other girl in school to bully her until she commits suicide and saves you the trouble. If the boy you love witnesses you committing murder, he would never love you, and the game would be over. For some, at the moment, the sex party has more credibility. And from 2015, there's none because of the Melbourne promotional trip.